Hello, thank you very much, Sarah, for the introduction, and I'm not offended by the North East Scotland Wi-Fi technology comments. I think you're quite realistic about that. Actually, so my name is Kate Smith. I don't work in the North of Scotland. I'm just here sorting out something to do with my family, but I am based at Camborne School of Mines in Cornwall in the UK. And I've worked broadly across different geoscience disciplines, particularly interested in hazard and risk and reducing the social impact of exploration and mining, which is what I'll talk to you more about today. And I work as a research fellow on a project called GreenPeg. It's an EU Horizon 2020 funded project led by the University of Oslo. And within this project, my role is to understand the social and environmental impacts of activities within the project and generally pegmatite mineral exploration. Pegmatites is what GreenPeg is looking at. But my work has implications for mineral exploration as a whole. It's not specific to pegmatites really. So today I'm going to talk to you about the social impact bit of this research rather than the environmental impact. And particularly we're looking at, although it says mining, and I'll come to why that's in the title, we're going to talk about the impact of exploration particularly, and it's had less attention than the impact of the social impacts of mining, which are very broadly and well understood and very thoroughly researched, and the industry is very proactive about. And as yesterday, my talk is going to highlight some of the same issues that really came out about trust and engagement. And if you can stay through my talk, you'll see what the monsters bit is all about. So I'm going to introduce you to two case studies within GreenPeg. In the social impact research I've carried out interviews in even further north than Aberdeenshire, in Arctic Norway, and also in southeast Ireland. And we've also carried out online surveys and in-person surveys in Cornwall in the UK and in northern Portugal. And I'm going to particularly talk to you about the interview results from Norway and Ireland today. So can I have the next slide, please? I was about to ineffectively click. Okay, so first of all, I'm going to take you to Norway. And in Norway, we have a field area for GreenPeg where there's it's mostly a greenfield site. There's a large oh no, I think that's the wrong term, brownfield site. There is historical mining, and there's a large mineral processing plant, and a lot of people in the community are employed through the processing plant or in fish farming or in other extractive industries related activities. And particularly interesting about this area is that the community is about 50% indigenous Sami people, about 50% Norwegian people. Also, I can't come to more than 100%, but there's also some international employees at the mineral processing plant. This community that doesn't have any or very, very, very little active mining at the moment, but they've had in the past. May I have the next slide, please? So here's a very brief overview, quick overview of some of the themes that came out of the work in Norway. In Norway, we interviewed 16 people for about 13.5 hours altogether. So this comes out of some quite long conversations with different people. I was interviewing people who are community leaders, politicians, and also community members. And really, the themes that came out a lot were that as you see the middle section that's extractives on that graph, the local feelings about local extractive industries, the mineral processing and past mining, and the existence of historical mines was really quite mixed, and quite a lot of positive feelings, probably because a lot of people are employed there, and it relates to the heritage and the jobs and activities of their parents and grandparents. More generally, feelings about extractive industries and mining more generally reflect concern elsewhere in Scandinavia and around the world about new mines opening. So they were rather more negative and more worried, less trusting of companies. There's quite a high trust of the extractive industry companies working in the local area. There's also some issues to do with and concerns about other types of development. But something that particularly came out in every single interview was the importance of the context, the historical context of this area, and the historical interactions between Norwegian and Sami people and the repression of Sami culture in the past. And associated that with that, I managed to have a very brief interaction with a serving politician, and his only point really was, do we care about free, prior and informed consent? And that was his headline. And I think if I look at all the other interviews, that was also the headline, that the importance of respecting Indigenous peoples, but also on a more broader scale, the importance of engaging with communities and building relationships at the very, very earliest opportunities. Okay, may I have the next slide, please? So some quotes from these interviews to highlight these points. Several people were really very clearly stated, we want to be included in the process from the very start. And also, the people were not actually bothered so much by the exploration activities that have been involved in the research projects. So the exploration activities themselves weren't causing problems directly. And I like these last 2 points. They reflect a recommendation by a local pastor who serves the Sami community, who emphasized the importance of trying to consider the landscape and working in this environment from the different point of view of the community there, and in particular from the Sami cultural point of view. And he had recommendations about how to be he says, be cautious about your footsteps and be aware of exactly where you're working, and thinking about the impacts, even on a small scale, of where you might site your drill hole, whether a meter to the right or left might be still just as useful, but have less impact, for example. And he was really touched. He got quite emotional when he was talking about, you're coming here willing to listen, and we're definitely not used to that. And I thought that was really quite an important headline to say that makes such a difference, that partnership and that understanding and that listening. Next point, please. Next slide, please. Here's emphasizing this one. The leader of the local reindeer herding community told me this. They normally ask, this is asking if there's permission, what the legal requirements for free, prior and informed consent, that Sami people must be consulted about their opinion about developments. But they ask in the last step. Normally the process happens so fast by that point that it's only possible to say yes or no. It's not possible to join in the conversation and negotiate. We have no choice. It's gone so long ahead, so far ahead in the process, you can't go back and plan a different way. And then we usually say no. Normally we have to say no. And he said that if companies could approach the reindeer herding community, but generally community earlier, then they could work together, come up with different opinions from the start and be able to compromise and be more collaborative. And the community there in this area were very keen on working together with companies. They recognize the importance that jobs have for their community. They would like their children to stay in the area, not move to Oslo, but they also want respect for the landscape and the heritage and culture. The next one, please. So that was a very, very brief description of what I learned in Norway. Here's a little introduction to what I learned in Ireland. So in Ireland, this community is very rural. It's agriculture based. Most people in the area either work in agriculture, that farms that maybe have been in their family for generations. There's some people have moved to the area, and they've moved to the area because they like this rural environment and the peace and the beauty and the nature. There has been exploration in this area since the 1970s, and there are some local gravel pits. There's some extractive industries. There haven't been any big mining activities in this area. They're a little bit further away than directly this area. Next, please. And a little bit of the data from these questions, these interviews. So the interviews here, we interviewed more than 20 people. I also spoke to sat into a community organized meeting where lots of people, over 50 people, expressed their opinions about the exploration happening in this area. And it was very clear that the actual exploration activities themselves, so in this area there's been a drilling campaign, they haven't, and there's been various other types of lower impact or lower, less visible exploration activities. They haven't caused so much direct problems for people or impacts environmentally or socially, but there was definitely an impact for exploration, and that is the concern that's generated about future mining. So you can see here, this diagram shows the particular issues that people had specifically about future mining rather than about what was happening at that time. A lot of them are to do with quality of life, health and safety. There's also the top category in the very top of the diagram shows about power and trust, and that there was a lot of concern expressed about how difficult it would be to trust a company to behave correctly, to not damage the environment, that whether the company would follow any laws, a lack of trust in there actually being a legal structure to prevent companies just trashing everything, and a lack of trust in community representatives or the government or national level organizations to have the community's interests to heart. So this lack of trust in companies or organizations from outside the local area really affected how people perceived what might happen and what the dangers might be. Next slide, please. And this was clearly, this worry about future mining was clearly very, very stressful for people. It's causing health problems, causing mental health problems for individuals and the wider community, and really overwhelming feelings. And it was definitely made worse by the visible exploration activity of drilling, and that people could see there was some more industrial activity, and that triggered a lot of these worries. Okay, next slide, please. And there's been an increase in the protests in this area, and a lot of coverage in the media, both when a prospecting license was being applied to be renewed and also more recently. And in some cases, these protests and the messaging, particularly the media, has, and this also came out in the interviews with most people I spoke to, an intermingling or a conflation of the words exploration and mining and what the difference was. In many cases, I think this is a misunderstanding or lack of understanding about what those things mean, but also perhaps it helps to sell papers if you say mining or miners rather than explorers or prospectors. So there is this language is important, and it has the effect of increasing the feeling of immediate environmental impact or social impact. Next slide, please. So 2 key points from these 2 case studies, and we'll come to monsters in a minute, is that it's very important to understand the history in Ireland, and the political context and social context has this feeling about a lack of trust. The top right-hand picture here is about concerns about other types of development, wind farm development. In Norway, the context was very much about the Norwegianization policies. Sami children here in this left-hand picture being sent to boarding school and to suppress their Sami cultural influences in their lives and to learn to become Norwegian. This has really affected how people felt about future development, future interactions with organizations or companies from outside the local area. And that's really important to understand how they respond to the exploration. Next slide, please. And this is nothing new. I know that you all know this, but with these interviews highlighted again, as every social impact type research in this area does, the importance of engaging with communities. It's absolutely clear from all the best practice recommendations for exploration and mining, early engagement, partnership building, being transparent, and trust and engagement. And these interviews, and this is the voice of the community really coming through these interviews, says exactly the same thing. But I know that it isn't easy always, particularly for very small exploration companies, to have the funds or the staffing to create a community officer and somebody to dedicate somebody to that role or to carry out those activities from the very earliest stages. But where we've looked at companies that have been able to do that, they've tended to have less problems or less difficult relationships with communities, and people in the community have felt better about things. But a very little step of being able to make a website, have transparent contact information, transparent information or news updates on a website, which doesn't necessarily require a full-time member of staff. Even that we've been able to see can help make a difference. And next slide, please. Okay, so what am I on about with monsters? So my reason for talking about mining is because it was worry about future mining that was causing the biggest anxieties, particularly in Ireland. And there is, as I discovered through carrying out this work, I was starting to think about the types of worries people had, particularly in Ireland where there's active exploration happening. And they can be categorized into two different types of worry. There's worries about things like, will my well be polluted by the activities? And that's a very realistic worry, is something that could happen, something that can be tested and discussed with a company, and it's a very almost manageable. But then there are also other types of worries that are unmanageable, they're unknown, they're uncontrollable, that they're not even in the control of companies, or they're not in control of anybody locally. They're really big, scary things. That could be, for example, some of the examples I was given was one person was concerned that their daughter would be raped by incoming staff who came to work in the big mine that was about to open. This project just is at a drilling stage, an exploration. There's no plan to make a mine. There's no mining related licenses. That's something, if it ever happens, is so far in the future. And the worry that was keeping them awake at night was if their daughter would be raped by people coming to the area associated with the mine. Also worries about, by looking about information about this type of commodity online, looking at, will our landscape look like a sailor in South America? Will there be all those massive impact in the potential impacts to water? Will our landscape be flattened and go all white? That's not what could happen in this area, but people were worried about it. So these are, we talk about monsters as, I'm talking about them as a way of categorizing worries into worries about things that are very unlikely or very far in the future or actually impossible, compared to the other worries that are actually quite possible and should be dealt with. And I thought this was a really useful way of thinking about it. We think about the monster under bed that really commands our thoughts and stops us being able to function, keeps us awake at night, and we can't do anything about it, and it affects our behavior. You don't want to get out of bed in case the monster gets your feet. You might not make it to the loo in the middle of the night. And I discovered that monster theory is actually a thing. And since 1996, somebody called Cohen came up with this idea of monster theory, and it's about how these fears develop in a community and how they reflect the concerns in a community, the worries. Can I have a next slide? I'm almost at the end of this. I know that I'm perhaps talking a little too long. Okay, so what is it that leads to these monsters? The type of worries that people have that start with exploration. They see a drill rig or they hear that there's going to be drilling, and they're worrying so far in the future about what might happen, that there's the idea that something imminently is going to happen. There's going to be a big mine opening next week. Well, it's partly to do with information availability and lack of perhaps understanding about what exploration is and how long it takes before you may or may not open a mine and what that mine might be like. That's associated with communication and engagement to do with companies and, say, geological surveys or governments that are issuing licenses. It's influenced very much by trust and power issues. And in Ireland, the trust and power issues were concerning to do with all sorts of types of developments or representation. It's also associated with knowledge and past experience. One person had lived in the south of Scotland in a landscape where there'd been a lot of mining, and it's very visible in the landscape. And there's also social implication. You talk to your neighbor, you ring up your aunt and you say, look, am I going to have to sell my house because there's going to be a mine opening and the house is going to lose value or my children are going to get sick. And importantly, this little blue circle at the bottom, the sense of place and home. And this is sometimes reflected in the term NIMBY as not in my backyard. But actually, our backyards are super important to us. They give us a sense of safety, security. And so it's important, the sense of place and home. And if you disrupt the thought, the sense of security in your home, then that can create a lot of anxiety. Okay. And it makes these worries seem very important. Next slide, please. So I would like to wonder, is there a way that we, as people who have access to more information about what exploration and mining is like, for companies who can try to engage at the very earliest opportunity and build partnerships, can we try and do something with these monsters and help tame them for people? Can we work with communities in a way that might do that? The next slide, please. And one way I think of thinking about this, and this is my second from last slide, is this is a classic equation used to describe an assessment of risk, and it's used in natural hazard and disaster management fields. And it also can be used as a way to think about how risk is perceived, because if you're from working in exploration industry and mining industry, your perception of the risk of development of an exploration project and what might impact a society will be different from a member of the community who's next door to it. Partly because you've got different sources of information and knowledge, but also you have less connection to the place. Your family isn't living on the doorstep necessarily. And if we look at these, if we look below the initial top equation, which means that our sense of risk is associated what the actual hazard is, what the danger is, how exposed we are, but also our vulnerability, we can think what feeds into those different steps. So how we understand a hazard is based on the knowledge we have about it. We need reliable information. We may be exposed to disinformation or even misinformation. We can do something if we're working in the industry or in academia or in these fields to maybe try and make better access to knowledge, be more transparent, be more approachable. If we think about the exposure, that's to do with the importance of everything that's at risk for people, their family, their sense of home, the nature that they love, their livelihood, the health of their children and their farm animals, for example. Those are absolutely critical to people. So of course this is important. And then the vulnerability, our sense of vulnerability is impacted by how much we trust the people who are supposed to represent us. Is our government looking out for us? Will they have our values as important? And those power imbalances. I think if we can think about these different factors that influence how people perceive the risk of possible future mining and why they worry about certain very extreme things at even a very early stage, it's more helpful than thinking about people just being worried about not wanting something in their backyard, because it's more complicated. And I'm sure everybody here would agree that it's important to have empathy and try and understand different people's points of view. And sometimes it's hard to see a different point of view when you have a different set of ways of looking at the world. Okay, so my next slide. So thank you very, very much for listening to me. And thank you very much for inviting me to be involved in this. And thank you to the communities that have spoken up to me and told me what they thought is important. So I guess my key points are that really, I think the biggest impact of exploration can be the worry and stress and anxiety caused about thinking about future mining, rather than the practical impacts of whether a lorry drives past and is a bit too noisy or some other type of impact associated with the actual exploration. And I think building community partnerships, working through risk assessments together, finding ways to start conversations and be transparent and build trust are maybe the keys to helping solve or deal with this, or one of the keys of many solutions. Thank you very much.
Caroline, Absolutely. Sorry, why did I call you Caroline?
Right.
Kate. There we go.
It begins
Kate,
with a
thank
K.
you so much for that. It was absolutely brilliant. Round of applause, everybody, for the wonderful Kate. Kate, there's been a huge amount of activity in the chat and the
Oh,
Q&A. What I'm going to do is I'm going to let you take a look at some of that, and then we'll try and bring you in a little bit later if you're still around to have some of those conversations. But I think some of those quotes that you used, including be cautious about your footsteps, through to she was crying on the phone to me, etc., are just so hard hitting. And I love this concept of the monster theory. I think that really helps to explain some of the complexity perhaps and the deep-seated emotion with regards to all of this. So Kate, thank you so much. Round of applause, everybody. Kate Smith.
Thank you.